Sal mentioned something, by the way, good morning, Jeremy and Joe. Happy Friday. High of 70 today.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Little rain later, though, right? Or there's a chance of it.
If I could ask a question about, is this guy a football player? Because the Bills, McDermott said it, was it at the Combine, and Sal brought it up and said, like, don't forget, Sean McDermott says, like, speed's great, but they got to be a football player.
Bean says the same thing.
Bean says the same thing, okay.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the reason they didn't take Worthy despite really liking him. Joe Brady, again, Tyler Dunn's reporting on that, asking Worthy about it. He wrote about it again yesterday about receiver, that Brady really loved Worthy, and they connected on a deep level, is what Worthy told Tyler Dunn. And they don't take Worthy, they take Keon Coleman, they trade down, they make their moves. You know, the Bills, as an entity, would have disagreements in the room and whatever. Why don't they take the receiver that they really hit it off with and they really liked? Maybe they don't think he's a football player, in finger quotes. Like we don't just want small guys, we want football players. And Worthy's one example, so forget about him. Put him on the side. Is Devonta Smith? Is Devonta or Devontae Smith? Which one is it? Either one. Is he a football?
I knew it, and then I've heard it twice. But it's Devonta Smith.
Okay, because every time I say it, the chat corrects me that I did it the wrong way. Because there's some are Devontae. Some
now
are Devonta.
I knew it right forever, and then that whole got me mixed up. But it's Devonta Smith. Yeah.
Devonta Smith. Is he a football player? 170 pounds.
He is.
Top drafted receiver, caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. Awesome. One of the best wide receiver tandems in the league. They have
AJ open all the time.
AJ Brown is the beast, and Smith is awesome.
Yeah. The Slim Reaper.
Would the Bills consider him a football player? I guess I'm wondering the speed element that they get. When they draft their speed guy, let's say it's 4th round, let's say it's 3rd round, you put it wherever you want. Mm. Is that guy going to be 6'3", no matter what? Because they don't really want small receivers. Shakir's the smallest guy they've got.
Yeah, but even he's compact, right? And he's strong, and he bounces off people.
Contact balance.
And he blocks a little bit.
Yep.
Is that really all it is? Is they only want receivers to block? Or that's I don't know. Maybe not a requirement, but if you're not going to block for us, you better be like an all-world prospect. Because when's the last receiver they have brought in or given any sort of investment to that wasn't at least an average block, seen as an average blocker?
Yeah. They always have...
Diggs even was, right? Like, do I have to go all the way back to like Brown and Beasley? They were small receivers. It is now 6 years since they brought those two in, though.
Yeah.
So I can go that far back if you want. But since then, Bean also talked about this year I think this was also at the Combine. He did like 45 minutes with Pat McAfee, and he kind of admitted to, I don't know if we're more built for Buffalo now than we were when I first got here and the first team that I built. And he talked about that like they've corrected something. And sure, there is merit to doing that. Your run game is going to be better, and the sport has changed that way. I hope that's why they did it, not because it's windy once a year. A lot more than once a year, but you know what I mean.
It's soon to be less windy.
It's going to be less, right, that's right. They're building a stadium that will be less windy.
The future of these games is less windy.
Right. So he kind of gave voice to, more physical, bigger, we're the Buffalo Bills. We should be a little bit more like that. And his actions do kind of represent that. Mm-hmm. Because since they signed Beasley and Brown, and even Diggs to a lesser extent, because Diggs was a fine blocker and was a little bit bigger than those two, they don't bring in those guys.
They do, but they do for like the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th receiver spots at training camp, like your Andy Isabella,
sure,
KJ Hamler.
Right, not guys that you would ever anticipate playing meaningful snaps.
No.
More than a couple snaps a game.
And if they draft a guy, whatever, McDermott says horizontal and vertical speed, and Bean did it at some point this year in the offseason too, talking about like track stars and...
Yeah.
I mean...
And some offenses, by the way, are designed that way. Like, I mentioned this last week, and the Rams just re-signed him. But the Rams and Tutu Atwell is always an interesting dynamic to me.
Because he's so different from what they do.
Because, right, McVay needs his receivers to be physical and to block and to be bigger. And that's just incorporated into their offense. And... Tutu Atwell, they spent a second-round pick on. He is 5'9", 165 pounds. He is like the smallest player in the league. So when they drafted him, I think there was confusion. Like, that does not fit what the Rams do. But sure enough, he never really played for them. But yet they signed him back, and they gave him $10 million.
And McVay said they've got to get him involved.
Right, so they maybe are telling you, we are going to change a little bit. Like, here's a guy that doesn't really fit what we do, but we want to work ways to get him involved in the game. And the Bills don't have a guy on their roster that I would think about that for. Like, you kind of got to change what you do a little bit. You got to have a certain package to fit that level of speed. The Bills don't have a player on their roster like that. If they were to get one, even if it was in round 4, I think it'd be interesting to how they would use him. How often would he play? If they draft one of these 7 receivers that they've had in on visits that's going to be a day 3 pick, they draft one of them in the 4th round, and he runs a 4.35, but he's not the biggest guy in the world. How do we think he's going to get used in year 1? Or even beyond that? Is he going to be on the field a lot? Is he going to be an all-down player? This was even a thing with Isaiah McKenzie a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. McKenzie had a couple of years where he'd do some nice things.
Really nice things.
And he'd be inactive sometimes.
Yeah. And then
Or he just would play like 8 snaps.
And then there was a year they decided, let's look for more from him.
They did do that.
And that did not work.
Right. They did have a year where they threw him out there. Yeah.
What was your receiver thought? You said going to the break, you're starting to lean more that way? I want to say...
It's less to do about the receiver itself, though, and more about the other positions. I feel like I got a reason why they might not do all these other defensive positions. Sal giving voice to that a little bit with cornerback, why like he doesn't think that'll be the pick at 30.
He sounds really confident they're not going corner with their first pick.
So there's corner. There's maybe it won't be corner. And defensive end. Well, they did invest in it. They brought in Joey Bosa. They don't have to do defensive end in the first round when Michael Hoyt comes back, and you've already got Rousseau and Epinesa. Like you've got numbers there. Defensive tackle is the one where like that's the one Sal kind of implies like he thinks like that's the need. And the caller from last segment brings up the guy from Michigan, Kenneth Grant. The thing about defensive tackle though is it is a one technique defensive tackle. It is not just opposite of what they do at that position under Sean McDermott. It is opposite of their philosophy on defense in totally for what they do on defense. Their whole thing defensively has been, we are going to stop the pass. We are going to try to stop the pass. And for all the complaints that fans have had about their run defense in these 7 years, and there have been games, Jonathan Taylor, and there was an Eagles game in there. Derrick Henry, sure. There have been games. There's
a Saints game in there.
Where they could not stop the run. There have been seasons where they could not stop the run. And the Bills' actions have basically said, yeah, we don't really care about it. We're fine. We want to stop the pass. Taron Johnson's talked that way. And last year...
Taron Johnson flat said, we want teams to run.
Right.
We want to invite the run. That's what they do.
Right. So they're going to do what now? They're going to go draft a 330-pound defensive tackle because he's good at stopping the run on a rush defense that, by the way, by DVOA was 10th last year. They weren't even bad. So I'm going to fix my not bad run game when they don't care about stopping the run game with my first pick? That makes sense to everybody?
I mean,
it's a need, and they don't have a guy, but it does not line up with how they treat that role and that value.
Well, if we're doing how they have treated value, do they value receiver enough to take one in the first round when they feel like they don't need one? Probably not.
Right, which is why I feel like I kind of have an argument now against every position.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Safety, there's an argument against it. Corner was the one, I didn't really have a great argument against it, but Sal made a good case, and we have had guests on that have said there might not be a corner that's worth the 30th pick when you get up to bat. It might be a trade down because, like the next guy is like 15 spots lower than where you pick.
803-0550. As you make the case against every position, what you're really pointing to is they don't need 10 picks. They don't need all these picks. Trading down is not something they should really be thinking about too much.
Yeah.
Trading up should be in the cards. I'm ready to start banging the table for whatever. Not exactly like I want them to trade up no matter what, but I'm starting to launch an offensive against team never trade up. Team never trade up. Because it's just such a blanket statement. It's such an easy thing to say. You sound really responsible, but
yeah,
whatever. The Bills didn't trade up for Diggs, but one time they traded their first-round pick for an established player, and how'd it go? It's their best first-round pick of the last 10 years, other than Allen. The best one. Just trading for the established player. So
I'd almost like to do an exercise, too, in how they acquired these picks. Like, how many of these picks are because they trade down in previous drafts? Because if there are any like that, you could just take the whole series of moves and say, well, they didn't really trade up. They traded down to trade back up, so it almost cancels each other out. You just move the pick a year. You know what I mean? Kind of like what they did with Worthy last year.
Right.
Where they did trade down.
But they pick slid.
They traded
moved
down
up.
so that they could trade up in another spot.
Right.